Welcome to the Sleep Hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. Tonight we follow Mr. Bean on a quiet, sleepy adventure. A night full of little mishaps, soft giggles, and the gentle search for the perfect place to rest. So close your eyes, hold Teddy close, and let the calm carry you towards sleep. The night had finally grown quiet. The streets outside were still, bathed in a silver wash of moonlight, and most of the neighborhood was already asleep. Behind the curtains of a small flat, a familiar figure shuffled about with his usual clumsy determination. Mr. Bean, with Teddy tucked firmly under one arm, was preparing himself for what he believed would be a long, restful night. His bed looked inviting. Pillows puffed, blanket neatly stretched, and even Teddy's special spot carefully arranged. Bean gave the bed a small pat as though testing it, then nodded approvingly. The day had been long, filled with the usual misadventures of his strange but ordinary life, and now, at last, he was ready to surrender to the comfort of sleep. He slipped under the blanket, dragging Teddy with him, and wriggled until he felt settled. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. For a moment it seemed as though this was going to be simple. A peaceful night, no interruptions, just rest. But of course, things with Mr. Bean are never quite that simple. A faint sound disturbed the silence. Tick-tock, tick-tock. At first it was barely noticeable, the steady rhythm of the clock on his bedside table. But the longer Bean lay there, the louder it seemed to grow. Tick-tock, tick-tock. His eyebrow twitched. He opened one eye, staring into the darkness. He tried turning onto his side, pulling the blanket tighter. He even tucked Teddy over his ear like a soft pillow. But the sound cut through it all. With an exasperated huff, Bean sat up. His hair stuck out in wild tufts, and his expression was a perfect picture of frustration. He reached for the clock, lifted it up, and gave it a shake, as though scolding it for daring to keep time so loudly. The clock ticked back innocently, unfazed. Bean glanced around the room, searching for a solution. His gaze landed on the dresser. With a determined nod, he opened a drawer, placed the clock inside, and slammed it shut. He clapped his hands together as if he had solved a great problem. At last, peace. He slid back under the blanket, closed his eyes, and sighed deeply. For a moment, everything was quiet again. The world seemed to soften, and sleep teased him at the edges of his mind. But no sooner had he begun to drift than another disturbance arrived. A faint flicker of light pulsed across the wall. His eyelids fluttered open. The lamp by the bedside table was flickering, its bulb glowing in uneven bursts. The shadows stretched and shrank, danced and disappeared, creating strange shapes that played across the room. Bean froze, his eyes darting about the walls. One shape looked like a crooked face, another like a long hand reaching for him. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, peeking out nervously. The lamp gave one final sputter before dimming again, then brightened, flickered twice more, and returned to a steady glow. Bean exhaled, clutching Teddy against his chest. He sat up, shuffled over to the lamp, and tapped it with his hand. The light steadied, but his suspicious frown lingered. He bent down, unplugged the lamp entirely, and set it aside with an air of triumph. Problem solved again. Back to bed he went. Blanket up, Teddy in place, eyes closed. The flat was once more silent. This time he even allowed himself a small smile. Sleep surely would come now. But then, without warning, disaster struck again. Not in the form of sound or light, but of Bean's own clumsy nature. As he turned to settle onto his side, his foot brushed against his slippers at the edge of the bed. The slippers, balanced precariously, tipped over and clattered to the floor with a dull thump. The noise startled Bean, and in his attempt to adjust, he rolled awkwardly, nearly tumbling out of bed himself. He clung to the blanket for balance, his legs flailing before he pulled himself upright. Teddy slid across the sheets, almost falling off the edge. With wide eyes, Bean caught him just in time, holding him up like a hero saving his best friend from certain doom. He placed Teddy back on the pillow carefully, patting him with exaggerated gentleness, as though apologizing for the rough handling. Then, with a resigned sigh, he lay back once more. The room finally settled into silence again. Outside, the moon shone calmly. Inside, the shadows rested quietly. For the first time that night, it seemed as though Bean might actually get some rest. His breathing grew even, his eyelids heavier, and his grip on Teddy loosened just slightly. But Mr. Bean's nights are rarely peaceful for long. Just as the calm finally began to settle, a new sound crept into the quiet. It was faint at first, so faint that Bean almost mistook it for his imagination, a gentle, steady drip. Plink, plink, plink. His ear twitched at the noise and one eye cracked open. The drip continued, echoing softly through the flat. Mr. Bean sat up slowly, his face twisted into suspicion. He turned his head toward the hallway where the faintest gleam of bathroom light seeped under the door. The sound was unmistakable now. The tap. The bathroom tap was dripping. Bean groaned dramatically, collapsing back against the pillow as if the universe had betrayed him. He pulled the blanket over his head and pressed it down firmly, determined to ignore it. But the more he tried to block it out, the louder it seemed to become. Plank, plank, plank. It was as though the entire flat was filling with the sound. Finally, with a sharp toss of the blanket, Bean sat up. His hair was even wilder now, standing in stubborn tufts, his eyes narrowed in sleepy irritation. He grabbed Teddy by the paw, lifted him like a partner in crime, and marched toward the bathroom. The bathroom was dark and chilly, and the tiles cool under his bare feet. Bean shuffled to the sink and stared down at the culprit. The tap sat there, dripping casually, each droplet glistening as it fell. He leaned in close, glaring at it with narrowed eyes. With a swift twist, he tightened the tap. For a moment, the dripping stopped. Bean smiled triumphantly, gave Teddy a proud nod, and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, plink, another droplet fell. His shoulders slumped. Bean stomped back to the sink, determined. He twisted harder this time, so hard the metal squeaked. He waited, watching closely. Silence. He leaned back, confident once again, until a single droplet slid down and fell with a victorious plink. His eyes widened, and his jaw dropped in outrage. He looked around frantically, searching for a solution. Spotting a roll of tape on a shelf, he grabbed it and began wrapping the tap as though mummifying it. Around and around, tug and pull, until the tap was completely covered. Bean stepped back, dusted his hands, and admired his work. Surely no drip could escape now. Satisfied, he began to tiptoe back to his room. He climbed into bed, snuggled Teddy under his chin, and shut his eyes. Silence again. Blessed phantom to you, beautiful silence. But silence in Bean's flat is always short-lived. This time it wasn't the tap. It was the outside world. Through the window came the faint sound of a cat meowing. At first, a simple cry. Lonely, perhaps. Then another, louder, dragging through the night air. That sounds familiar. Bean's eyes shot open. His head jerked toward the window. He froze, listening. The cat meowed again, this time followed by a soft scratching sound against the windowsill. The neighbor's cat, of course. A nighttime prowler who had chosen tonight, of all nights, to announce his presence. Bean sat upright, groaning quietly, and shuffled to the window. He pulled the curtains back just enough to peek outside. And there it was, the cat, perched on the ledge, staring straight at him with wide, glowing eyes. It meowed again, louder as if mocking him. Bean waved his hand, shooing it silently. The cat didn't budge. He tapped the glass. The cat blinked slowly, utterly unfazed. Desperate, Bean opened the window just a crack and hissed like a snake. The cat responded with a meow so piercing that Bean nearly toppled backward. He slammed the window shut and yanked the curtains closed. His face was a mix of exhaustion and outrage. He marched back to bed, dragging the blanket up to his chin like a fortress wall. Teddy was tucked securely under his arm once more. For a long moment, Bean lay perfectly still, eyes wide open, ears straining for any new noise. The ticking of the hidden clock was muffled, the lamp was unplugged, the tap was bound, and the cat was outside. Perhaps, just perhaps, this would be enough. His breathing slowed again, his eyelids drooped. Teddy nestled comfortably against his chest. The flat, at last, seemed to have surrendered to the stillness of the night. But Bean's restless night was far from over. In the quiet, the smallest details, the things no one else would notice, were waiting to stir him again. The room was calm again, but Mr. Bean was not. Even when silence finally returned, he found himself listening harder, straining his ears for the faintest disturbance. His body lay stiff under the blanket, like a soldier on guard duty, eyes flickering open every few seconds. He rolled onto one side, hugging Teddy close. He tried shutting his eyes and forcing a yawn, hoping sleep would take him quickly. But his restless mind refused. He adjusted the pillow. He adjusted it again. Then once more, punching it into shape with growing frustration. Nothing felt right. At last, he tossed the pillow aside completely and rested his head directly on the mattress. For a moment it seemed to work. His breathing softened, his body sank deeper into the bed. But then, as if in betrayal, a single spring in the mattress creaked beneath him. Bean shot upright, scandalized, staring down at the mattress as though it had committed an unforgivable crime. He patted the bed suspiciously, then bounced lightly, testing it. Creak, creak. The sound returned, quiet, but enough to unravel all his attempts at calm. He rubbed his face in his hands, groaning silently, then stood. His movements were sluggish, heavy with fatigue, but determined. He began rearranging his sleeping spot as though moving to a new home. First, he stacked pillows high, arranging them into a cushioned throne. He sat proudly, clutching Teddy, only for the pile to sink and topple beneath him, sending him sliding off the bed in a heap. Bean scrambled up, brushing himself off with offended dignity. His eyes darted about the room once again, searching for salvation. His gaze landed on a chair tucked neatly in the corner. Slowly, a plan formed. He dragged the chair closer, stacked it with cushions, and placed a folded blanket across the seat. With a triumphant grin, he sat down, arranging Teddy on his lap like royalty. For the first time all night, comfort seemed possible. The cushions supported him, the blanket was snug, and his head lolled to one side as his eyes closed. His breathing grew heavy. His body slumped. At last, after all the noises and flickers and interruptions, he was finally on the edge of sleep. But just as dreams were about to claim him, the chair betrayed him too. With a loud, sharp creak, one leg shifted slightly under the uneven weight. Bean's eyes snapped open. He froze, hoping it would hold. Another creak followed. Then another. Slowly the chair tilted, wobbling dangerously. Bean clutched Teddy with wide eyes, bracing himself. The chair lurched forward, then steadied, then lurched again. With a clumsy scramble, Bean leapt up just before the chair toppled onto its side, cushions spilling across the floor. He landed with a grunt, clutching Teddy protectively to his chest. He looked at the fallen chair with open betrayal, his mouth twisting to a silent complaint. Sleep, it seemed, was determined to play games with him tonight. Too tired to rebuild, too annoyed to keep trying, Bean shuffled about the room with heavy steps. His eyelids drooped, his body swayed. He looked around desperately, searching for anywhere at all, that might grant him the peace he longed for. His eyes landed on the cupboard standing quietly against the wall. It was tall, wooden, and dark inside. A strange choice, perhaps, but to Bean, it looked inviting. Safe, quiet, and free from creaky mattresses or treacherous chairs. Without hesitation, he opened the doors, cleared a small space among the neatly stacked clothes, and squeezed himself inside. He sat cross-legged at first, testing the space. The wood was firm but silent, the shadows deep but comforting. He stretched the blanket across his lap, tucked Teddy under his arm, and leaned back against the corner. To his surprise, it felt right. The cupboard embraced him like a cocoon, shutting out the flickers, the drips, and the outside world. For the first time that night, Mr. Bean's shoulders dropped, his breathing slowed, and his eyes softened. Teddy's button eyes reflected a tiny sliver of moonlight peeking through the cracks in the cupboard door. Bean yawned long and quiet, settling deeper into the wooden nook. His eyelids fluttered, his head tilted forward. Sleep at last was beginning to wrap around him. But Bean's restless night was not ready to end just yet. The cupboard was snug, but snugness alone could not hold back Mr. Bean's restless nature. At first, he shifted once, then twice, adjusting his position. His knees bumped against the wooden door, his elbow pressed into a shelf, and every movement made the faintest creak of wood. Still, Bean forced himself to stay. His determination showed in the way he squeezed Teddy tighter, his eyes half closed with sheer exhaustion. The rhythm of the night whispered around him, the hum of the quiet flat, the distant sigh of wind against the window. For a fleeting moment, peace seemed possible. Then, rustle. Somewhere above him, in the very shelf where he had stuffed a pile of old scarves and jumpers, something shifted. Perhaps it was just gravity, perhaps a clumsy arrangement. But to Bean's ears, it sounded like a lurking creature. His eyes shot wide open, darting upward. A scarf drooped over the edge of the shelf, dangling like a lazy snake. Bean stared at it in horror, then jabbed it quickly back into place with his finger. He gave the shelf a warning glare, then hugged Teddy even closer, as if appointing him the guardian of their tiny cupboard fort. He shifted again, curling his legs tighter, only to bump against a shoe left at the bottom. The shoe tipped over with a muffled thud. Bean flinched, his head hitting the wooden wall. He rubbed the sore spot and pouted, his tiredness battling with his irritation. Slowly he lay sideways, curling into the shape of the cupboard itself. The wood was hard, the air stuffy, but it was quiet. For a while the stillness soothed him. His eyelids drooped once more. His breathing evened. Teddy rested under his chin. But outside the cupboard the night continued its quiet mischief. From somewhere beyond the flat, a car alarm blared suddenly. It wasn't close, not right outside, but loud enough to pierce the silence. The sound echoed through the walls, bouncing around Bean's fragile calm. He bolted upright in the cupboard, eyes bulging, head nearly smacking against the shelf above, his face twisted in outrage. He scrambled out of the cupboard, tripping over the fallen shoe, fumbling his way to the window. He peeked through the curtains. Down the street, a parked car flashed its lights in rhythm with the alarm, the sound shrill and merciless. Bean groaned silently, flapping his arms in exasperation. He stuffed the curtains back into place and slumped against the wall, his head rolling with fatigue. Still, he refused to give up. He trudged back to the cupboard, climbed inside once more, and pulled the doors nearly closed. With the faintest crack left open, a strip of moonlight slipped in. He adjusted Teddy against his shoulder, his face softening slightly as his exhaustion deepened. The minutes crawled by. The alarm outside finally gave up, leaving the night still once more. Inside the cupboard, Bean's breathing grew slower. His limbs sagged, his head drooped. He was at last teetering on the fragile edge between waking and dreaming. But the night had one final trick. A faint buzzing sound began to creep into the quiet. It was subtle at first, like a whisper. Bean's brow furrowed even in his half-sleep. Then the sound grew clearer, an unmistakable hum, the lazy drone of a fly circling the flat. The insect swooped near the cupboard door, its wings beating in uneven bursts. Bean cracked one eye open, his expression dark with disbelief. He swatted clumsily in the air, missing entirely, then buried his head deeper under the blanket, dragging Teddy along with him. The buzzing continued, louder now as the fly circled the lamp, the chair, the bed. Bean groaned into the fabric, wriggling deeper into the cupboard, as though burying himself from the world. There, in the cramped darkness, he tried once more to surrender. His hand stroked Teddy's worn fur. His breathing fought to remain calm, and his eyes fluttered in uneven patterns. Every part of him was begging for rest, but the night was relentless. And so, with every flicker, drip, meow, creak, and now buzz, Mr. Bean's restless night stretched on, an endless comedy of interruptions, each small, silly nuisance keeping him from the one thing he wanted most, sleep. Yet still he clung to the hope that perhaps, if he endured just a little longer, it would finally arrive. The fly continued its lazy dance through the room, tracing loops and zigzags with a persistence that mocked Bean's exhaustion. Every time it buzzed closer, his face twitched. His hands flailed blindly in the dark. He slapped the cupboard door, clapped in the air, even tried to blow at it with sharp puffs of breath. But the fly was untouchable, darting away at the last second. Finally, with a weary grunt, Bean shoved the cupboard doors open and stumbled out into the room once more. His hair was a mess, his pajama shirt crumpled, his eyes half shut from fatigue. He moved clumsily, his arms swiping at the air like a sleepwalker in battle. Teddy dangled from one hand, caught up in the struggle. He grabbed a rolled-up magazine from the table and stalked the room with exaggerated stealth. Creeping on tiptoe, his gaze locked on the buzzing intruder. The fly zipped past the lamp. Bean swung, missed. It darted toward the chair. He lunged, tripped on a cushion. He fell face first into the blanket heap, groaning quietly. When he sat up, the fly was gone. Or at least, it seemed to be. Bean looked around suspiciously, the magazine still raised in his hand. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Perhaps the little pest had flown out the window or simply vanished into the night. Too tired to care, Bean dropped the magazine and trudged back toward the cupboard. His steps dragged, his shoulders slumped. He crawled inside once again, pulling Teddy close with a gentleness that contrasted his frustration. This time, he didn't bother closing the doors all the way. He left them ajar as though surrendering. He leaned back against the wood, eyes half closed, mouth slack with fatigue. His head lolled to the side, resting on a folded sweater. He breathed in deep, slow patterns, finally letting his body sag fully into the cupboard's embrace. Teddy's button eyes glimmered faintly in the moonlight. At last, there was quiet. True quiet. No ticking, no flickering, no dripping, no meowing, no creaking, no buzzing. Just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around a weary soul like a blanket. Bean blinked once, twice. His eyelids sank lower with each pass. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. For the first time all night, he teetered on the very edge of sleep. But Mr. Bean, being Mr. Bean, couldn't leave the moment simple. Just as his mind began to drift, his own snore startled him awake. His head jerked upright, eyes wide, mouth open. He looked around wildly, as though an intruder had entered the flat. Realizing it had been his own doing, he slumped again, shaking his head in tired disbelief. He hugged Teddy tighter, pressing the little bear under his chin. His breathing steadied once more, softer this time, careful, as if trying not to disturb himself. Slowly, the stubborn energy drained from his body. His hands loosened, his face softened, and at last, a calmness seeped in. The cupboard, though cramped and peculiar, cradled him like a cocoon. Outside, the moon hung high, casting pale silver lines across the floor. The night had not given up its mischief, but Mr. Bean's weariness finally outmatched it. And so, in his strange little cupboard nest, with Teddy safe at his side, Bean drifted into the fragile beginnings of sleep. Not quite deep, not entirely secure, but enough to bring him a moment of rest. The restless night was not finished. There were still more obstacles ahead, more interruptions to face. But for now, in this brief pause, the weary man and his little bear floated on the edge of dreams, wrapped in the odd, gentle comedy of his struggle. The night grew still once more, at least for now. For a brief, precious moment, it looked as though Mr. Bean had finally triumphed over the chaos of the night. Tucked into his makeshift cupboard nest, Teddy snuggled under his arm, his eyes gently closed, and his breath rising in a slow rhythm. The world seemed at peace. His battle with the flickering lamp, the ticking clock, and the buzzing fly had left him worn down to the very edge of exhaustion. Sleep had begun to fold its soft arms around him. And then, drip. At first it was small, so faint it might have been a trick of his drowsy mind. But then came another. Drip, drip, each one sharp, echoing like a stone dropped into a deep well. His eyelids fluttered open. He frowned in the darkness. Another drop fell, louder now. Mr. Bean groaned silently and rolled over, pulling the blanket higher. He buried his head into the pillow, pressing it down against his ears with determined force. For a few seconds it worked. The sound was muffled, dulled into almost nothing. But his imagination was already awake, busy at work. In his mind, the gentle drip grew into a crashing waterfall, relentless and unstoppable. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it was no use. The sound pulsed inside his head, louder with every imagined splash. Finally, his patience snapped. With an exasperated toss, he hurled the pillow aside. His hair puffed in every direction, and sat upright, like a man wronged by the world itself. Still clutching Teddy, he dragged himself toward the bathroom, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. His face was heavy with fatigue, but his eyes burned with determination. The bathroom light buzzed faintly as he switched it on, bathing the room in a pale yellow glow. There it was, the culprit. His bathroom tap glistening wickedly, letting fall one drop after another into the porcelain sink. Each droplet landed with a soft plink, perfectly timed to irritate him. He leaned in close, glaring at the tap as though it were alive. He twisted it sharply. The metal squeaked, and the drip paused. For a moment, he felt victorious. He gave Teddy a proud glance, almost smug. But as he turned to leave, a droplet slid free and fell. Plink. Bean froze. His eyes widened. He spun back around, twisting the handle tighter with both hands, gritting his teeth. The squeal of metal echoed, then silence. He leaned close, nose nearly touching the tap, waiting. Seconds ticked by. No drip. He relaxed, shoulders sagging, ready to retreat back to bed. Blink. Another drop fell, slow and deliberate, like the tap was mocking him. His face twisted into disbelief. He slapped his forehead, groaned quietly, then scanned the bathroom for a new plan. His eyes landed on a roll of tape resting on the shelf. Perfect. He snatched it up and began wrapping the tap with reckless determination, layer after layer, until the shiny metal was mummified in a cocoon of sticky strips. He leaned back, hands on hips, nodding at his handiwork. Surely no drip could escape this fortress. Satisfied, he padded back to bed. He collapsed into the mattress with a heavy sigh, pulling Teddy close and yanking the blanket over himself. His eyes drooped, his breathing softened. But then, faintly, from the bathroom came a muffled plink. He sat bolt upright, his mouth dropping open in sheer disbelief. His taped fortress had failed. The drip had returned, quieter perhaps, but still there, slipping through his defenses like an enemy spy. His shoulders slumped. His arms dangled limply at his sides. He was utterly defeated. With sluggish steps, he returned to the bathroom. He searched again, desperate. His eyes landed on a plastic cup by the sink. He grabbed it, turned it upside down, and pressed it tightly over the tap. The cup clung there, trapping the drip. He exhaled in relief. Problem solved, again. Back in bed, he flopped down heavily, dragging Teddy half onto his chest. His eyelids fell, his breath grew steady. Sleep began to creep close once more. But this was Bean's night, and it had no intention of letting him rest. From outside the flat came a long, low moo. His eyes shot open. He froze under the blanket, staring at the ceiling. Another meow followed, louder this time, dragging through the stillness of the night. His face contorted in despair. He rose slowly, dragging the blanket with him like a cape, and shuffled to the window. Pulling back the curtain, he peeked outside. And there it was, the neighbor's cat. Perched boldly on the ledge, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. It sat proudly, tail swishing, as if it owned the night. Bean pressed his finger to his lips, silently shushing it. The cat blinked unimpressed, and meowed again, louder. Bean sighed deeply, his shoulders collapsing. He let the curtain fall back into place, trudged to bed once more, and slid under the blanket. With a final, weary gesture, he yanked the blanket over his head, blocking out the world. For now. Under the blanket, the world was dark and muffled. For a few moments, Mr. Bean felt safe, hidden away from dripping taps and meowing cats. The air grew warm in his little fabric cocoon. Teddy tucked tightly against his chest. His breathing slowed, his eyes fluttered, and sleep tiptoed closer. But the night had no mercy. The cat outside was not finished. With all the persistence of a midnight singer, it meowed again, long and dramatic. The sound carried easily through the thin walls, filling Bean's ears even through the blanket. He squeezed Teddy tighter and pulled the blanket higher, until only the tips of his hair peeked out. Another meow followed, sharper this time. Then came a scratching sound at the window, claws against the ledge. Bean's face twisted in despair beneath the blanket. His eyes opened wide in the dark, as if to ask the world, why me? At last, with a muffled groan, he threw off the blanket and stumbled toward the window. His movements were clumsy, heavy with exhaustion, but his frustration gave him energy. He yanked the curtain back and glared outside. The cat was still there, sitting proudly on the sill, its eyes glowing in the moonlight. It tilted its head at him, then let out another piercing meow, louder than before. Bean flailed his arms wildly, shooing it with grand gestures. The cat did not move. He tapped the glass sharply, then tried making faces, grimaces, pouts, even a silent roar. The cat blinked slowly, bored. Desperate, he cracked the window open and waved his hand outside. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the scents of the night. The cat leaned forward curiously. Bean hissed like a snake, puffing his cheeks and narrowing his eyes. The response was immediate. The cat threw back its head and let out the loudest meow yet, sharp and shrill, the sound tearing through the night like a trumpet. Bean nearly toppled backwards, startled by the sheer force of it. He slammed the window shut with both hands, rattling the glass, then dropped the curtain back in place with finality. He staggered back toward the bed, defeated, dragging his blanket behind him like a cloak of surrender. He crawled under the covers, buried his head into the pillow, and pulled the fabric high over his face. Teddy was clutched under his chin, his little arms folded around the bear in pure desperation. For a while he lay perfectly still, pretending the cat didn't exist, pretending the outside world had gone quiet again. And slowly, almost unbelievably, the meowing faded. Whether the cat had grown bored or simply wandered off, Bean didn't care. The silence returned heavy and beautiful. He dared to peek out from beneath the blanket. The room was still. No flickering lights, no dripping taps, no feline chorus. Just the faint glow of moonlight stretching across the floor. His shoulders dropped. He exhaled deeply, the tension melting out of him. He adjusted his position carefully, curling onto his side, his cheek resting against the soft pillow. Teddy was tucked neatly into place, the blanket wrapped snugly around them both. He closed his eyes and inhaled the quiet, letting the silence soak into him. For a fleeting moment, he believed it was over. The battles of the night were behind him. Sleep stretched its arms toward him again, whispering promises of dreams. But the stillness, as always in Mr. Bean's life, was fragile. His ears twitched. From somewhere deep in the flat, faint and almost forgotten, came the smallest sound. Not the cat, not the lamp, not the tick-tock of the clock. Plink, the bathroom tap. Bean's eyes flew open once more. His jaw dropped in disbelief, and his arms flailed out from the blanket in silent outrage. The muffled drip had returned, stubborn and steady, refusing to be silenced by tape or cups or even sheer exhaustion. He buried his face into the pillow with a muffled groan, kicking his feet under the blanket in protest. Teddy, caught in the middle, bounced lightly as Bean twisted and squirmed in despair. The night was laughing at him now, and Bean knew he wasn't finished fighting. Mr. Bean sat upright in bed, hair standing on end, his wide eyes glowing in the moonlight with a mix of fury and despair. That sound, the cruel, never-ending plink, was still there. He clasped Teddy under one arm and marched toward the bathroom again, each footstep a stomp of determination. The door creaked open, and there it was, the tap, proud and smug, dripping at its own leisurely pace. Each drop sparkled as it fell, as though showing off, mocking Bean's exhaustion. He leaned in close, his nose wrinkling, lips pursed in deep thought. His mind worked furiously, and though his eyelids drooped with tiredness, he would not lose this battle. Not tonight. This time his eyes landed on Teddy's scarf, draped neatly over the back of a chair. Slowly, almost guiltily, Bean reached for it. Teddy's glassy button eyes seemed to stare at him in silent protest. Bean paused, giving his companion an apologetic shrug, then hurriedly tied the scarf tightly around the tap's mouth. The fabric soaked up the drip, muffling the sound. He stood back proudly, nodding at his cleverness. There, his expression seemed to say. Finished. With a spring in his step, or as much as one could manage in the middle of a sleepless night, he shuffled back to bed. He tucked Teddy under the blanket, smoothed the pillow, and curled into the mattress once more, his eyes closed. For the first time in hours, peace felt real. But scarves were not made for plumbing. The drip seeped through slowly, darkening the fabric, until it was heavy and soggy. And then, just as Bean's breathing steadied into the edge of a dream, the scarf surrendered. Plink. His eyes popped open. His face sank into the pillow. He didn't move, didn't groan, didn't even blink. He lay still like a man who had accepted his fate, his hope slipping away drop by drop. But slowly determination rose again. He rolled out of bed like a soldier summoned to battle and staggered back to the bathroom. His hair was wilder now, his eyes darker, but his spirit, though weary, was fierce. He rummaged through the cupboards, clattering bottles and brushes, until his hand landed on a small sponge. He raised it like a knight drawing his sword. Perfect. He stuffed it into the sink directly under the tap so the drops would land silently. He patted it in place, smiled proudly, and whispered a silent "good night" to his invention. Back to bed he went, swaying slightly like a man walking home after a long journey. He collapsed into his blanket, grabbed Teddy, and exhaled with relief. His eyelids shut, and for the briefest of moments, the world was silent, until the sponge soaked through. It squelched under the relentless drip, overflowing and oozing down the sink. A faint, wet squish replaced the plink. Different sound, yes, but no less irritating. Bean's eyes opened wide in horror. He clapped his hands over his ears, pressing hard, but the sound squirmed its way into his head. He shot out of bed once more, his face twisted in pure disbelief. He stomped to the bathroom like a furious storm, yanked out the sponge, and tossed it into the corner. His arms flailed in hopeless gestures as he scolded the dripping tap silently. His shadow stretched long and thin against the wall, making him look more frantic, more desperate. Finally, he collapsed onto the bathroom floor, sitting cross-legged in front of the sink, his head in his hands. Teddy sat beside him, leaned against his leg, watching with glassy calm. The drip continued, steady as a clock, echoing in the silence. For a moment, it seemed as though Bean had surrendered, resigned to spend the night listening to the torment. But then his eyes lit up. Slowly he looked down at Teddy, then back at the sink. A plan was forming. He leapt up, grabbed a saucepan from the kitchen, and placed it carefully under the tap. Each drop landed with a soft plink inside the pan. Bean crouched down, tilted his head, and listened. Yes, it was still noise, but it was neat, tidy, predictable, almost like music. He swayed side to side with the rhythm, a small smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps, if he treated it like a lullaby, the dripping could finally help him fall asleep. He padded back to bed, tucked himself in, and lay there listening to the saucepan orchestra in the bathroom. Pling, pling, pling. It wasn't silence, but it was steady. He let the rhythm wash over him, his body finally beginning to relax. Maybe, just maybe, this was the answer. For a while, the saucepan seemed like a miracle. The tap's endless drip had transformed into a steady beat, a rhythm soft enough to fool his mind into thinking it was purposeful. Plink, 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 like a drum keeping time in the quiet of the night. Bean lay in bed, eyes half closed, rocking slightly in rhythm as though the saucepan had become his personal lullaby. His breathing slowed. Teddy rested comfortably in the crook of his arm, the blanket snug over them both. The world felt almost calm again. Almost. Because soon, the rhythm began to change. The drops no longer fell evenly. They came faster, then slower, then two at once. Plink, 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 plink. The saucepan, instead of soothing him, became an unpredictable percussion instrument. Bean's brow furrowed. He shifted under the blanket, his body tense. The offbeat drips poked at his nerves like tiny fingers tapping on glass. Then the sound grew louder. Each droplet rang against the metal, echoing into the silence of the room. It was no longer a lullaby. It was a concert he never wanted. Bean shoved the pillow over his head, groaning silently into the fabric, but the metallic chorus pierced through. With a sudden burst of energy, he jumped out of bed, stormed into the bathroom, and yanked the saucepan away. The dripping resumed directly into the sink, sharp, precise, taunting. He slammed the saucepan down with a clatter, startling even himself. He stood there, chest rising and falling, eyes wild. Then he froze. The neighbor's cat. From outside came another long, mournful mew, louder than before, as though it had been waiting for the perfect moment to return. Bean's head turned slowly toward the window, his expression one of complete defeat. First the tap, now the cat again. He tiptoed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. There it was, perched proudly on the wall, tail flicking, eyes gleaming. Its meows rolled into the night like a singer demanding an encore. Bean slumped against the window frame, his mouth twisted in despair. But then his eyes sharpened. If he couldn't silence the cat, maybe he could outsmart it. He crept to the kitchen, rummaged quietly through the cupboards, and returned with a saucer of milk. With exaggerated care, he opened the window just a crack and slid the saucer onto the ledge. The cat's ears perked immediately. It padded over, sniffed the offering, and happily bent down to drink. The meowing stopped. Bean's face lit up with triumph. He closed the window gently, dusted his hands in silent victory, and strutted back to bed. He climbed under the covers, pulled Teddy close, and lay back with a satisfied smile. At last, silence. For a few blissful minutes it remained that way. No dripping, no meowing. Only the faint hum of the night outside. His eyelids grew heavy, his breathing slowed. Sleep crept closer once more. But silence in Bean's world never lasted. The saucer outside tipped. Milk sloshed over the edge, dripping onto the ground below. The cat, delighted by this unexpected game, began pawing at it, batting the saucer noisily across the ledge. Clink, clink, scrape. The porcelain rattled against the stone, bouncing rhythmically. Bean's eyes shot open again. His hands flew to his face. The cat was louder now than ever, not with its voice, but with its play. He dragged the blanket over his head, trying to hide from the sound, but the rattle of porcelain was impossible to ignore. He tossed the blanket aside, stomped back to the window, and threw it open. The cat froze mid-swipe, looking at him innocently as though it had done nothing wrong. Bean pointed furiously at the saucer, waving his arms like a conductor demanding silence. The cat simply licked its paw. Bean groaned, slammed the window shut, and stumbled back toward the bed. His movements were clumsy, drained of energy. His eyelids drooped, his head heavy. He collapsed onto the mattress without even fixing the blanket. Teddy tumbled onto his chest, and together they lay in the dark, listening to the night's endless chorus. The tap dripped. The cat played. And Bean, exhausted beyond words, lay there in a silent plea for peace. Mr. Bean lay flat on his back, arms stretched wide, staring into the shadows of his ceiling. The world seemed determined to keep him awake, no matter how much he fought for rest. Every drip from the tap, every scrape from the saucer outside, every meow from the cat, it all collided in his weary mind. It was a full orchestra of irritation, and Bean was its unwilling audience. He rubbed his eyes furiously and then sat up once more. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his determination glimmered faintly. He would win this war. Somehow. Dragging himself to the kitchen, he rummaged through drawers with frantic energy. Pots clanged, spoons rattled, and boxes toppled until he emerged with an odd collection of items. Earplugs made from crumpled tissues, an umbrella, and a cooking pot. It wasn't much, but in his tired mind it was a battle plan. First, he marched to the bathroom and shoved the tissues deep into his ears. They muffled the dripping, turning the sharp plink into a faint thud. Not perfect, but better. Next, he snapped open the umbrella, wedged it under the tap, and angled it, so the drip rolled silently down into the sink. He stepped back, arms folded, and grinned proudly. Clever. Very clever. But then came the cat. Again. He tiptoed to the window, cooking pot in hand like a shield. He cracked the curtain just enough to peek out. The cat had abandoned the saucer and was now pawing playfully at the drainpipe, its claws scraping noisily against the metal. Scritch, scritch, clatter. Bean's eyes bulged in disbelief. He raised the pot high, as if to make a grand declaration, then set it gently on his head like a helmet. It clinked against his ears, and the world grew duller, quieter. A silly solution, perhaps, but it worked. At last, armed with tissue earplugs and a saucepan helmet, Bean returned to bed. He collapsed heavily into the mattress, dragging Teddy under his arm. His eyes drooped, and the soft rise and fall of his chest slowed into a rhythm. The noises outside continued. The tap dripped. The cat scratched. The saucer rattled. But to Bean, wrapped in his ridiculous armor of makeshift protection, it was finally muffled enough to fade into the background. For the first time all night, silence, imperfect but silence to him, settled over his mind. His eyelids shut fully, his mouth hung slightly open, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Teddy rested peacefully on his chest, almost as if proud of his companion's persistence. The moonlight draped across the room like a soft blanket, catching on the absurd sight of Mr. Bean in bed, tissues poking from his ears, a pot gleaming on his head, and a tangle of blankets cocooning him like a tired knight who had fought too many battles. Outside, the cat gave one last meow before curling up quietly on the ledge. Inside, the umbrella under the tap swayed gently, holding steady. The night finally gave in, surrendering to Bean's stubborn determination. And there, at last, in the midst of chaos tamed by his own odd inventions, Mr. Bean drifted into sleep. His snores rose softly, comically uneven, but they were proof of victory. The battle of the noises was over. For now. The room was finally quiet, or as quiet as it could ever be in Mr. Bean's world. The dripping tap had been tamed with an umbrella, the noisy cat outside had drifted into silence, and his saucepan helmet still rested awkwardly on his head. For most people, this would have been enough. But not for Bean, because comfort, that elusive treasure, still escaped him. He wriggled beneath the blanket, twisting onto one side. His legs curled, then stretched, then curled again. Nothing felt right. He flipped to the other side, tugging Teddy with him. The pillow was too low. He sat up, plumped it with both fists, and slammed his head back down. Too high now. He tried folding it in half, then stacking it with the spare one, then sliding it under his shoulders. Each experiment lasted only a few seconds before his face twisted in dissatisfaction. With a grunt of frustration, he flung the pillows aside. He yanked the blanket over his body, then kicked it off a moment later. Too warm, too heavy. He tried lying with just the sheet, but then shivered as the cool air brushed over him. He pulled the blanket back again, tucking it tightly around his legs, then immediately kicked it free. Teddy wobbled dangerously in his grasp during the entire performance, but Bean never let go. Next came the grand rotation. With a sigh, he swung himself around so his head was at the foot of the bed, and his feet dangled over the pillows. He lay flat, staring at the ceiling. No, that wasn't it either. He curled himself into a ball upside down, Teddy cradled against his chest, the blanket tangled around his ankles like vines. Still wrong. He tossed, he turned, he rolled across the mattress in every possible direction until the bed looked like a battlefield. Pillows strewn across the floor, blanket twisted into a rope, sheets pulled nearly off the frame. The mattress groaned under his endless shifting, as though it too was growing weary of the struggle. Bean sat up at last. hair wild, eyes half-lidded, and stared at the wreckage of his bed. He tapped his chin thoughtfully, then scanned the room. His eyes landed on the armchair in the corner, a humble piece of furniture that had watched this entire spectacle in silence. Slowly, a smile crept across his face. Yes, the chair. That might do it. He shuffled over, dragging the blanket with him like a royal robe. He tugged the chair to the center of the room and inspected it closely, patting the seat, testing the arms. Not bad, but it needed more. He retrieved the fallen pillows and stacked them carefully, one after another, building a soft tower of cushions. Then he draped the blanket across it like a grand throne covering. With Teddy tucked proudly under his arm, Bean climbed into his new creation. He adjusted himself on the padded seat, shuffled, and finally sat tall, his back straight, his chest puffed out. He looked like a sleepy king upon his throne, wrapped in softness. For the first time in hours, his face relaxed. His eyelids grew heavy and his head drooped gently forward. The steady rise and fall of his breathing returned soft and slow. Teddy rested on his lap, safe and warm. The room was still. The throne was comfortable. Sleep at last. But then, creak. The chair shifted beneath him, its old wooden legs groaning. Bean froze, eyes snapping open. He held perfectly still, daring not to breathe. Silence followed. He exhaled slowly, sinking back into the cushions. His eyelids closed again. Another creak. Louder this time. The chair wobbled ever so slightly. Bean's eyes darted open again. His grip on Teddy tightened. He leaned forward cautiously, as if his weight alone might topple the entire structure. The chair groaned once more, shifting under the strain of stacked pillows and Bean's restless body. His face twisted in alarm. He raised his arms slightly, preparing for disaster, his eyes darting left and right. And then, with a startled little hop, he abandoned the chair altogether. He landed on his feet. Teddy clutched tight and spun around to glare at the wobbling throne. It teetered ominously before settling, crooked and unstable. Bean shook his head firmly. No, that would never do. He looked around the room again, desperate for a new solution. His gaze fell on the cupboard, a dark, quiet corner. A space small enough to feel safe, but large enough to curl up in. His expression softened. Perhaps that was the answer. With slow, deliberate steps, he opened the cupboard doors wide. The shadows inside welcomed him. He crawled in with Teddy, dragging a blanket behind him, and settled onto the floor. He curled up tightly, knees tucked to chest, blanket wrapped like a cocoon. Teddy rested beneath his chin. And there, in the quiet dark of the cupboard, Bean finally felt something close to peace. Inside the cupboard, Mr. Bean shifted slowly, testing the space. The wood was cool against his back, the walls close on either side. It was snug, almost too snug. But after the chaos of his bed and the betrayal of the chair, snug felt like safety. He pulled the blanket higher, letting it drape over his shoulders like a cloak. His knees pressed against his chest, Teddy tucked firmly beneath his chin. For a brief moment, all was still. The hum of the night seemed distant now, muffled by the cupboard's doors. A faint smile softened his tired face. Yes, this could work. But comfort never came easily. The cupboard floor was hard, pressing into his hip bones. He wriggled left, then right, trying to find a softer spot. He laid the blanket flat beneath him, smoothing it with both hands, then curled up again. Better, but not quite. He sighed and stretched his legs out. Thud. His feet knocked against the far side of the cupboard, jarring him. He pulled them back in, folding tightly again. His shoulders cramped. He hunched forward, then leaned back, head tilted against the wooden panel. It felt too stiff, too upright. His face scrunched with determination. He reached out for one of the fallen pillows from the bed, dragging it into the cupboard and stuffing it behind his head. He shifted against it, wriggled, then gave a satisfied nod. His throne of cushions had betrayed him, but this pillow fortress might hold. Settling back, he closed his eyes. The darkness of the cupboard wrapped around him, thicker than the blanket. It was quiet, close and safe. The world outside felt far away. His breathing steadied, his face relaxed. Teddy nestled into the curve of his arm, watching silently with button eyes, then thunk. His head slipped sideways, smacking gently against the cupboard wall. His eyes popped open again, blinking. He rubbed his temple with a sleepy wince, then adjusted the pillow, patting it firmly. He leaned the other way. Thunk. His head bumped the opposite side. Bean sighed in despair. His narrow shelter made rest a balancing act. Still, he refused to give up. He stacked 2 pillows instead, wedged them carefully, and leaned back once more. This time his head stayed upright. He folded his arms, nodded once, and shut his eyes with exaggerated determination. The cupboard creaked faintly as he shifted. A floorboard under him groaned. He froze, eyes darting, then silence again. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the tiny space. His eyelids fluttered, heavy and slow. Sleep teased at him. He let his body go slack, his grip on Teddy loose but protective. A soft snore slipped from his lips, uneven but real. But even in his cupboard sanctuary, comfort played tricks. His leg cramped, twitching suddenly. He jolted awake, startled, bumping his head against the shelf above. He rubbed the spot with a groan, then pulled his legs tighter, folding like a pretzel. Teddy was squashed between his chest and knees, but Bean refused to let go. He sat there, half asleep, fidgeting and adjusting, shifting pillows, smoothing blankets, sighing every few minutes. The cupboard was quiet, but quiet didn't mean comfortable. Still, as the minutes ticked by, the small space began to feel warmer. The walls cocooned him. The pillow softened against his head. The blanket tucked neatly around his body, sealing him in. His eyelids grew heavy once more. He shifted once, twice, then stilled. And slowly, reluctantly, his body began to surrender. For the first time in hours, Bean wasn't tossing, turning, or hopping in panic. He was still. Curled up in his cupboard like a child hiding from the world, he let exhaustion cradle him. Teddy rested against his chest, his little face poking out from the folds of the blanket. Mr. Bean's breathing slowed, and his face softened. The chaos of the night faded, just a little, and there in the shadows of the cupboard, it seemed he might finally drift into something that resembled comfort. For a few blissful moments, the cupboard felt like a safe cocoon. The world outside seemed distant, and Bean's eyelids drooped heavily. Yet the deeper into stillness he sank, the more little discomforts crept in. His back ached. His arm went numb beneath Teddy's weight. His toes, pressed awkwardly against the wooden wall, tingled with pins and needles. Bean stirred again, groaning softly as he shifted. He wriggled out of the cramped fold, stretching his legs until they pushed the cupboard door open slightly. A sliver of moonlight spilled in, highlighting his tired, stubborn face. He sat upright, thinking hard. No, he wouldn't abandon this hideout. Not after everything. The bed was a battlefield, the chair a traitor. The cupboard was his last fortress. If it wasn't perfect, then he'd make it perfect. And so Bean got to work. He shuffled back to the bed, gathering spare pillows, tugging them across the floor one by one. He stuffed them inside the cupboard, layering them like bricks, creating a padded floor. With exaggerated care, he spread his blanket over the cushion pile, smoothing it flat, patting it down as though preparing a royal mattress. He stepped back, squinted, and gave a satisfied nod. Yes, this was progress. He climbed in again, wriggling down onto the padded floor. A muffled oof escaped his lips as the soft mound sank under his weight. He stretched his legs experimentally. They fit snugly, though still bent, and his head rested against the side without too much bumping. Better. Much better. But Bean wasn't done. He scrambled out again, eyes darting around the room. He spotted the bedside lamp, unplugged it, and carried it over. He placed it carefully outside the cupboard, letting its soft glow spill in. Now it wasn't just a hiding place. It was a cozy den. His tired smile widened at the transformation. Back inside he went. Teddy tucked under his arm once more. The glow from the lamp cast warm patches of light on the wooden walls, softening the shadows. The pillows cradled him from all sides. He adjusted himself carefully, folding the blanket around his shoulders like a cloak, and rested Teddy on his chest. His breathing slowed again. Thunk. His elbow knocked against the side. He grimaced, then rolled onto his other side. Thunk. His head tapped the opposite wall. He groaned, muttering a sleepy protest under his breath, and finally curled himself tightly into a ball. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, soft, and private. This time he held still longer. His body sagged into the pillows, his eyes half closed. A crooked, weary smile lingered on his lips as if to say, "Yes, this is mine." Then creak. The cupboard groaned faintly under his shifting weight. Bean froze, wide-eyed, waiting. Another creak, softer this time. The wood seemed to protest his presence. His mouth twitched nervously, but he forced himself to stay put. He shut his eyes tightly, hands gripping Teddy a little firmer, as though bracing for another betrayal. Seconds passed, then minutes. The cupboard settled again, no longer groaning. The silence returned, thicker than before. At last, Bean began to relax fully, his chest rising and falling steadily. His body slackened into the cocoon of cushions, and his grip on Teddy loosened ever so slightly. The quiet darks, paired with the gentle glow from the lamp, wrapped him in a fragile peace. And there, within his makeshift den, Bean looked almost content. Almost. Because even in this tiny kingdom of pillows and blankets, sleep still hovered just beyond his grasp. His body twitched now and then, adjusting. His head slid an inch against the pillow, bumping the wall. His legs shifted, curling tighter. Yet the effort he had poured into this strange little nest meant he refused to give up. He was determined. He would sleep here, no matter how many fidgets it took. And with every blink, every droop of his eyelids, every quiet sigh escaping his lips, the cupboard seemed closer and closer to finally claiming him into its dark, quiet comfort. At last, Mr. Bean sat perfectly still inside his little cupboard fortress. His head rested against the pillow-stuffed corner. His blanket cocooned him tightly, and Teddy was nestled safely beneath his chin. The lamp's warm glow flickered softly across the wood, casting long, gentle shadows that looked almost protective. For once the night seemed to agree with him. His eyelids fluttered, heavy as stone. Each blink grew slower, longer, until his eyes finally sank shut. His breathing settled into a faint rhythm, a little uneven, but steady enough to signal that he was on the edge of surrender. A soft snuffle escaped his lips, and for the first time all night, Mr. Bean was not fidgeting, not inventing, not sighing, only drifting. The cupboard cradled him like a secret hideout. The world beyond, the dripping tap, the prowling cat, the wobbling chair, all of it faded into nothing. Here there was only quiet, or so he thought. Creak. The sound was faint at first, like a whisper beneath him. Bean's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His head bobbed forward slightly, and he snorted, still teetering on the edge of slumber. But then the cupboard gave another groan, louder, longer. Creak. The wood wood seemed to shiver under his weight. Bean's eyes flew open, wide and startled. He sat rigid, holding his breath, ears straining in the muffled dark. For a long moment, silence. He slowly relaxed, lowering his head back onto the pillow. Maybe it was nothing, just wood settling, just imagination. But then came a tiny wobble. One of the cupboard's legs, uneven against the floorboards, shifted just enough to tilt. The cushion pile inside slumped slightly to one side, sending Bean sliding a few inches across the narrow space. He let out a muffled gasp, clutching Teddy to his chest as though bracing for disaster. The wobble stopped. The cupboard stilled again. Bean sat frozen, pupils darting nervously from side to side, as though he expected the entire piece of furniture to collapse at any moment. His blanket slipped from one shoulder, but he didn't dare move to fix it. Not yet. Not until he was sure. Slowly, cautiously, he adjusted. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself, tucked Teddy safely under his chin, and shifted his weight towards the back wall of the cupboard. It groaned again under the pressure, but this time it held. He exhaled with exaggerated relief, his shoulders slumping. The wobble had startled him, but he refused to leave. After everything, the restless bed, the treacherous chair, he would not give up on this sanctuary. He leaned back once more, carefully this time, and let his body sink into the pillows. His eyes slid shut again, slower now, cautious. His breathing steadied. The creak seemed to fade into the distance, less threatening, more like a faint lullaby of the wood itself. For a little while, there was peace again. The cupboard no longer felt like a coffin of discomfort, but a strange, cozy cave. Bean's imagination softened in his half-sleeping state, turning the groans and creaks into something less frightening, almost soothing. Each sigh of the wood matched his own. Each wobble seemed to rock him just slightly, like a cradle. And though he remained curled awkwardly, knees to chest, his body finally surrendered to exhaustion. His mouth opened slightly, a faint whistle of a snore escaping. Teddy slipped a little lower in his arms, but stayed firmly hugged. Yes, it seemed this time the cupboard might actually hold him through the night, but fate, as always, had other plans. Because as his head drooped lower, his chin sinking into his chest, the cupboard gave one last long groan, its loudest yet. Crack! The entire frame shuddered, wobbling side to side. Bean jerked awake instantly, eyes bulging, hands gripping the walls as though riding a boat in a storm. The wobble stilled, but his heart pounded wildly in his chest. He sat upright, breathing hard, staring at the door as if deciding whether to flee or remain. It was a battle between stubbornness and exhaustion. And Mr. Bean, ever determined, simply pulled the blanket tighter, hugged Teddy close, and prepared to try again. The cupboard swayed one last time, groaning beneath Mr. Bean's stubborn weight. He sat hunched inside it, wide-eyed, as though expecting the whole thing to collapse around him. His blanket drooped off his shoulders, his hair stuck up at odd angles, and his face bore the perfect mixture of exhaustion and frustration. It was clear now. This fortress of pillows and planks would not hold. He huffed through his nose, lips pursed in a pout, and clambered out of the cupboard. The pillows tumbled after him, spilling across the floor like a soft avalanche. Bean stood there in the glow of the lamp, clutching Teddy, his pajama trousers wrinkled and his blanket trailing like a cape. He looked around the room with tired desperation. Bed? No, cursed and restless. Chair? Wobbly traitor? Cupboard? A squeaky disaster. Where then? His eyes darted about, scanning every corner like a soldier plotting his retreat. The table? Too hard. The rug? Too flat. Then his gaze landed on something small, dark, and oddly inviting. The open bottom drawer of his wardrobe. His brows lifted. His lips curved into a sly smile. Yes, that would do. Bean shuffled across the room, dragging the blanket behind him, and peered into the drawer. It was barely large enough for him, but that had never stopped him before. He patted the inside, tested its sturdiness, then began his mission. With comical determination, he stuffed the blanket inside, arranged the pillows into a nest, and finally lowered himself in, knees to chest, squirming and wriggling until he was wedged snugly inside the drawer. It was ridiculous, completely impractical, but for Bean, it was perfect. The wooden sides pressed close, wrapping him like a box. The blanket cocooned his shoulders. Teddy was tucked tightly beneath his chin, only his button eyes peeking out into the night. Bean gave one final satisfied nod, his eyelids already drooping. The drawer creaked softly as it settled under his weight, but unlike the cupboard, it didn't wobble. It held steady. It was quiet, dark and close, like a secret hiding place that only he knew. Bean shifted once, twice, then stilled. His breathing slowed, his lips parted, and a faint, silly snore slipped out. His head lolled gently to one side, resting against the wooden edge. At last, true, undeniable comfort. The room around him was still a mess. Pillows scattered, blankets half draped across the floor, the cupboard door ajar like a gaping mouth. But inside that drawer, Bean was at peace. The lamp glowed softly, casting a halo of warmth over his makeshift nest. The noises of the night had faded. The tap's drip was distant, the cat long gone. All that remained was the steady, comical rhythm of his snores, echoing faintly in the quiet. And there, curled up in a wardrobe drawer like a child hiding from the world, Mr. Bean finally found the comfort he had searched for all night. It was not in the bed, not in the chair, not even in the cupboard. It was here, in the smallest, silliest corner of the room, a place no one else would ever choose, but for Bean it was just right. Teddy rested peacefully against his chest, his little stitched smile reflecting the absurdity of it all. Together, the two of them drifted deeper into sleep, safe in their wooden cocoon. And as the drawer sat quietly, holding its peculiar guest, the night at last fell still. At last, after battles with bedsheets, duels with dripping taps, and quarrels with the creaking cupboards, Mr. Bean found himself cocooned in stillness. His strange little fortress, a humble cupboard-turned nest, stood quiet and steady. The wooden walls that had earlier groaned in protest now seemed to hush into silence, as though the night itself had finally given up its mischief. Inside, Bean was curled tightly, wrapped in his blanket like a child tucked into bed. Teddy rested against his cheek, his worn fabric soft against Bean's skin, a familiar comfort that no pillow could match. For once there was no frown wrinkling his forehead, no twitch of irritation pulling at his mouth. His face softened, his jaw slackened, and his lips parted ever so slightly as his body released the tension it had carried all night. The air in the cupboard felt different now, not stifling, not cramped, but cocoon-like. Every creak of the wooden frame had quieted, replaced with a hushed stillness that seemed almost protective. The noises of the outside world, the tap, the cat, the rattling saucer, were gone, muffled into nothing by the small, snug walls. Bean, at last, was safe from them all. Moonlight crept gently across the room, spilling through the thin curtains and stretching into the cupboard in faint, silvery stripes. It lit the side of Bean's face, catching the curve of his cheek and the soft rise of his chest as he breathed. The glow shimmered faintly against Teddy's button eyes, making them gleam like tiny stars in the quiet dark. His breathing slowed, deepened. Each inhale was steady, each exhale softer than the last. A little snuffle escaped now and then, comical in its uneven rhythm, but even that had a soothing cadence. The sounds no longer belonged to a restless man, but to someone who had finally surrendered to rest. The room itself seemed to exhale with him. The scattered pillows on the floor lay still. The blanket draped from the chairs sagged softly, unmoving. Even the cupboard doors, left slightly ajar, seemed to lean inward like watchful guardians, the shadows folding over Bean like another layer of protection. For the first time all night, there was balance. Bean shifted slightly, only to nuzzle closer into his blanket. His fingers twitched, brushing Teddy's paw before curling gently around it. His shoulders, once hunched and tense, were loose now, his body sinking fully into the makeshift bed he had crafted with stubborn determination. What had been a battlefield of discomfort just hours before had become a little sanctuary of peace. Outside, the night deepened. The moon sat high, its glow faint but unwavering. The street beyond the window was silent. No cars, no voices, no clattering noises to disturb him. The world had gone to sleep, and Bean, after so much resistance, had finally joined it. His snores came gently, in fits and starts, the kind of sound that might have annoyed anyone else in earshot. But in the empty quiet of his flat, they were oddly reassuring, proof of victory. Proof that after every tumble, every wobble, every hopeless fidget, he had finally won the one thing he had chased: sleep. And in this small, absurd way, the night had become tender. The man who had fought his own bed, waged war on dripping taps, and sought comfort in the strangest of places was now at peace. There was no spectacle, no fanfare, just a man, his Teddy, and the quiet embrace of sleep. The cupboard, ridiculous as it seemed, had become his castle. Its walls, once obstacles, were now shields. Its creaks, once enemies, were now lullabies. And within it, Mr. Bean slept like a child who had finally been cradled into rest. The moonlight shifted slowly, painting the room in softer shades, and the night stretched on. Everything held still. Everything breathed with him. For the first time, everything was calm. The quiet of the cupboard wrapped around Bean like a second blanket. For so long he had fought against the drip of the tap, the yowl of the cat, the betrayal of his chair. Now all of that seemed distant, almost unreal, as though those troubles belonged to someone else entirely. In their place was a hush, so complete, so gentle, that the very air seemed to hum with peace. His snores came in uneven bursts, rising and falling like the tide. One moment a sharp snuffle, the next a soft whistle, before fading into silence again. Yet each sound blended into the rhythm of the night, no longer jarring, but strangely fitting. If the room itself could listen, it might sigh with relief, grateful that its restless occupant had finally surrendered. The moonlight shifted across the floorboards, creeping slowly toward the cupboard. It brushed against the edge of the door, casting a faint silver outline that looked almost like a doorway into another world. Inside, Bean's face glowed faintly. His expression softened into something childlike. The furrow that had once marked his brow was gone. The tight line of his lips had slackened into a faint, peaceful curve. Teddy, ever faithful, rested against his cheek. One little stitched paw was squashed beneath Bean's chin, the other peeking out from the folds of the blanket. The toy's button eyes glimmered faintly under the dim light, as if keeping watch over the strange den its owner had chosen. Together, man and bear looked inseparable, their bond as steady as the silence around them. Outside, the world moved quietly onward. A breeze passed the window, rattling the curtain ever so slightly. A faint hum of a car in the distance flickered, then vanished. None of it reached Bean. The cupboard's walls shielded him from it all, turning every possible disturbance into nothing more than a whisper. Time, too, seemed to slow. Each second stretched long, unhurried. The cupboard became its own little universe, a capsule of stillness where nothing needed to change. Bean twitched slightly in his sleep, his shoulders giving a small shudder before relaxing again. His lips smacked softly, as though tasting some half-remembered dream. His hand shifted, patting Teddy's head once, then stilled. Whatever dreamscape he had wandered into, it was kind. The room reflected his peace. The pillows scattered across the floor looked less like chaos now and more like clouds resting after a storm. The toppled chair sat quietly in its corner, no longer threatening, simply waiting. Even the stubborn tap in the bathroom seemed subdued, its dripping lost in the night. There was a strange magic in this calm. It was not the calm of silence alone, but the calm that comes when a long struggle has finally ended, when a weary heart has found, at last, a corner where it can rest. And though Mr. Bean looked ridiculous, crammed inside a cupboard, blanket bunched around his knees, Teddy pressed to his cheek, he also looked, in some small way, dignified. A man victorious, not because he conquered the night in the usual sense, but because he never gave up. He fought for his rest, and in the end, he found it. The moon lingered, watching through the glass, before beginning its slow descent. Shadows shifted again, softening, stretching, folding into one another. The night was slipping deeper, but in this room, in this cupboard, time didn't matter. Only the steady sound of Bean's breathing did. And that was enough. As the night deepened, Mr. Bean's breathing slowed to a rhythm so steady it seemed to weave itself into the silence of the room. Each exhale was a whisper, each inhale a faint sigh. The cupboard, which had once creaked and protested, now held him firmly, as if it too had decided to rest. His body, curled into a snug bundle, sagged heavier with each passing minute. Sleep was no longer a fragile visitor that might flee at the slightest sound. It had rooted itself, settling into him with certainty. His head lolled against the pillow-stuffed wall, his hair messy and wild, his mouth hanging slightly open in surrender. And then, slowly, the world outside the cupboard began to fade from meaning. The faint flicker of moonlight on the floorboards blurred. The hush of the wind against the curtain melted into nothing. Time loosened its grip. Bean had slipped past wakefulness, deeper into the dreamlike quiet that only true exhaustion could bring. In his slumber, his fingers twitched now and then, tightening protectively around Teddy. The little bear, squashed against his cheek, seemed almost alive in the glow of the moon, its button eyes reflecting faint sparks of light. To Bean, even in sleep, Teddy was a guardian, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this small wooden cocoon. If dreams came to him, they must have been soft ones. His lips curved faintly at times, twitching as though smiling at some unseen joke. His shoulders lifted with a quiet chuckle, though no sound followed. Other times his brow furrowed briefly before smoothing again, like clouds drifting across an otherwise clear sky. The shapes of his dreams were hidden, but their warmth glowed through him. The room, too, seemed to dream. Shadows swayed gently along the walls, slow and unhurried. The chair, toppled earlier in his frantic search for comfort, leaned at an angle that now looked oddly restful, like it had simply chosen to nap where it fell. The mound of pillows scattered on the floor resembled puffs of mist, soft and harmless, no longer reminders of frustration. The moonlight that touched his face brightened for a moment as a cloud shifted outside. It draped him in silver, as though crowning this absurd sleeper in his wooden throne. There he was, Not a restless man, not a grumbler at war with every sound in the night, but simply a soul who had, at last, surrendered to peace. The longer he slept, the deeper his body sank into stillness. The tension drained fully from his limbs. His chest rose and fell in slow waves. The uneven snores softened into something gentler, like the faint hum of a lullaby. For once, nothing stirred him. Not the imagined drip of a tap, not the phantom scrape of a cat. The world outside could have danced and clattered, but in his cupboard sanctuary, Bean heard none of it. His world was now the soft rhythm of his own breath, the warmth of Teddy and the hush of wooden walls holding him steady. In that moment, the room no longer felt like four walls and a cupboard. It felt larger, dreamier, like the boundaries between reality and imagination had blurred. Perhaps in his dreams, Bean wandered somewhere far softer, a place of endless pillows, warm blankets, and silence so pure it felt like music. The cupboard didn't just hide him, it carried him. It had become a cradle for his rest, a bridge into dreams, and within it, Mr. Bean, ridiculous, stubborn, endlessly inventive Mr. Bean, looked almost serene, almost royal even. In the quiet absurdity of it all, the cupboard had become more than a hiding place. It was now a fortress, a nest, a sanctuary designed by accident, but perfected by need. Every creak of the wood, every snug angle seemed to cradle Mr. Bean closer, urging him deeper into slumber. His snores shifted again, swelling louder before softening into a gentle rumble, like distant thunder rolling across a meadow. At times he snorted abruptly, startling Teddy slightly, then settled back into rhythm as though nothing had happened. The sounds, though comical, filled the silence with warmth rather than irritation. They were the music of rest, hard won, of a night that had finally surrendered to sleep. The moonlight drifted higher across the walls, leaving the cupboard in shadow. But the darkness here wasn't heavy, it was soothing, a blanket of its own. Within it, Bean looked impossibly small, his figure curled tight, almost childlike. For a man who had battled so fiercely against taps, chairs, cats, and creaks, it was oddly touching to see him at peace, clutching Teddy as if the world outside could no longer reach him. The air in the room seemed to follow suit. Absolute that every small sound became precious. The faint shuffle of Bean's breathing, the whisper of fabric as he shifted, the muted creak when his knee nudged the wooden wall. Each tiny noise was a lullaby, layered upon another, weaving the cupboard into a cocoon of calm. Even the objects in the room seemed content. The blankets he had tossed about in frustration now lay like fallen clouds, quiet and unbothered. The stack of pillows slumped lazily in a corner, as though sighing after their chaotic ordeal. The fallen chair, once a wobbly throne, had grown perfectly still, its awkward angles softened by the forgiving dark. Nothing asked for his attention now. Nothing demanded to be fixed, silenced, or rearranged. The battle of the night was done, and all that remained was this simple, blissful pause. Bean's dreams deepened. His body twitched now and then, his fingers flexing against Teddy's fur. His lips parted as though to murmur something, yet no words came, only a soft hum of breath. Whatever his dreams held, they carried him kindly, offering him the comfort reality had denied for so long. The moon outside dipped further toward the horizon, its glow paling into something more fragile. A hush of dawn still lingered far away, but it seemed content to wait, unwilling to disturb this fragile pocket of peace. Inside the cupboard, Bean shifted one final time, pulling Teddy tighter and tucking his chin down as though burrowing into the safety of his little wooden cave. His breathing deepened again, steady as the slow beat of a drum. For once there was no comic chaos, no interruptions, no half-awake fumbling, only rest. And in the strange, tender absurdity of the scene, grown man, toy bear, cupboard bed, there was something profoundly right. The night had tried its best to chase sleep from him, but Mr. Bean had won in his own peculiar way. He had built himself a fortress of quiet, and within it, he slept like a king in his castle. The night had reached its deepest hush. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, as though afraid to disturb the fragile miracle of Bean's slumber. The cupboard, once just a simple wooden box tucked against the wall, now felt like the safest place in the world. Its panels were shields, its shadows guardians, its silence a gift. Inside, Bean was utterly still. His face, usually animated with mischief, stubbornness, or confusion, was now calm, softened into the expression of a man who had finally been given what he longed for: rest. His chest rose and fell with steady rhythm, and the faint sound of his snores puffed gently against the quiet, like the whisper of waves on a distant shore. Teddy remained tucked beneath his chin, its worn fur pressed warmly against Bean's cheek. If the little bear could think, it might have been proud to stand guard through the endless commotion, proud to share in the victory of peace. The bond between them was silent but unshakable, and tonight it shone more clearly than ever. The room around them glowed faintly with the last brush of moonlight. Shadows melted into one another, stretching long and soft across the floor. Every object rested exactly as it was, unmoving, unbothered. The toppled chair no longer seemed awkward, but simply still. The scattered pillows, once tools of desperation, were now silent companions to the night. Even the blanket trailing from the cupboard door looked perfectly at ease, draped like a curtain announcing the entrance to a secret hideaway. Time, within that small space, lost its urgency. Hours passed unnoticed, measured only by the slow drift of the moon across the sky. What had been a restless, frustrating night, full of battles, now stretched into something timeless, almost enchanted. And Bean? He slept on. His breathing deepened further, heavy with the weight of dreams. Now and then he let out a soft snuffle, or shifted his leg against the wall, but nothing stirred him, fully awake. His body had surrendered entirely, as though every ounce of him knew this was the rest he had needed all along. It was strange, almost comic, and yet profoundly touching. A man curled inside a cupboard, cradling a toy bear, looked more complete than he ever had in his large, comfortable bed. The very absurdity of it was what made it beautiful. The night outside finally began to change. The moon slipped lower, surrendering its place to the faintest touch of dawn. A pale blue edged the horizon, but inside the room the cupboard remained cloaked in safe shadow. The first hints of morning light dared not intrude yet. It was as if the day itself chose to let Bean sleep a little longer. Everything about the scene seemed to bend itself toward his peace. The house no longer creaked. The tap remained quiet. Even the cat outside, so loud earlier in the night, stayed silent, curled perhaps in its own patch of rest. The world had joined in a kind of truce, stepping softly around the fortress of the cupboard. And so the night closed its story not with chaos, but with calm. Mr. Bean, after 1,000 tiny battles against flickers and drips and squeaks, had found the stillness he craved. Not in the way most would expect, not in a bed or on a chair, or surrounded by order, but in his own peculiar way, in a cupboard built for coats and boxes, now transformed into a cradle for dreams. There, in that strange little space, he drifted deeper still, untouchable by the world beyond. For once, everything was as it should be, and the house, the night, the moon, and the dawn, All of them agreed to let it remain that way. And now, Mr. Bean drifts peacefully into dreams, safe and snug with Teddy by his side. May this quiet adventure help you relax, breathe softly, and drift into your own restful sleep. Good night, and sweet dreams, everyone.